How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Samach Beis, Daf 62 of Nesech Avodah Zarah. Friends. So today we begin the fifth and final parak of Nesech Avodah Zarah, parak Hasoicher Es HaPoel. What can I tell you about today's daf? So interestingly, it feels like somewhat straightforward in some ways. It's interesting. It's interesting. There's been an absolute ton of Tosfos, and yet there's no Tosfos takeaways on this stuff. Like they're like kind of like technical and stuff. So it's interesting. There's only 2 chapters to today's daf, working with the nesech and working with stam yaynum. And that's what we're talking today about, being hired for work that involves nesech, stam yaynum. Let's focus on nesech for a second. So, can you be hired? Can an Ovid Kochavim hire you, a Yid, to be working in his nesech winery or whatever it is, doing work with the nesech? Okay, so that's really the focus of today's daf. And without further ado, let us jump in. Okie dokie. So we are going to begin on Daf Samach Beis Amud Aleph, all the way at the top of the Mishnah. Hasoicher Es HaPoel. So if an Ovid Kochavim hires a Yid, Lasses Imo be nesech for nesech work. Okay, he's got barrels that he moving or so, whatever it is. He wants to hire you to help him out with his nesech. Scharo osir. Any money that you make from that job, osir. It's nesech money, osir. Scharo lasos imo milacha acheres. Now, what if the Oved Kochavim hired the Yid to do something else, to work at his salad bar? And then, what happens? He says, can you pass me that barrel of yayn nesech? Mimakim the makim, from one place to another, move it from one place to another. Schar mutter, his wages that he earned working at the salad bar are permitted. Okay, so if he was hired specifically to work with the yayn nesech, that's going to be a problem. But if he was hired to do some other work, and then somewhere along the line, the Ovid Kochavim says, hey, can you move some yayn nesech for me? That's not going to disqualify his entire wage. Although the Gemara is going to talk about that a little bit somewhere. I think maybe in Daf Samach Daled or Samchei or somewhere like that. Hasoicher Es HaChomer. Similarly, so if you have a Yid who owns a donkey, and he rents out his donkey to an Ovid Kochavim. The Ovid Kochavim has some yayn nesech. He needs to move from some place. He needs a beast of burden. So he borrows a donkey from a Yid. He rents a donkey from a Yid. Hasoicher Es HaChomer. Somebody who hires a donkey from a Yid. An Ovid Kochavim hires a donkey from a Yid. Lahavi aleh yayn nesech, so that the Ovid Kochavim can transport yayn nesech. Scharo osir. Also, the Yid cannot receive payment. That payment is going to be off limits. The payment that he received for his renting out his donkey. But what if the Ovid Kochavim simply rented the donkey to sit on it? He needed to sit. So he rented a donkey to sit on. Even though the Ovid Kochavim then put his, I think Legino is probably his like yayn nesech or something, his jug of yayn nesech or something. Schar mutter, the wage is permitted. The Ovid Kochavim had hired and rented the donkey just to sit on it, even though he put on his jug of yayn nesech, the Yid can still receive his wage. Okay, I just looked it up. Legino is a flask, for anybody who was wondering. Now, says the Gemara, my time schar osir. Oh, okay. Right? The lawyer wants to know, okay, how come? How come? How come? A Yid was hired by Novik Kochavim, and as Rashi points out in the first Rashi of the Parak, the first Rashi of the Mishnah, he says on the third line of Rashi, yayn nesech mamish ka'amer. We're talking about real yayn nesech over here. We're not talking about stam yaynum. We're talking about real yayn nesech. It was like actually libated. So now the question is, how come the schar is also right? A Yid was hired by Novik Kochavim to work with the yayn nesech. How come whatever money he receives is forbidden? So, ilema hoyil v'yayn nesech osir bahano scharonami osir hari orlo v'kilei akerem dasur bahanoyo bitnan machron v'kidesh b'dmeyen mikudeshes. Okay. So this actually, we're not going to learn with Tosfos here, but Tosfos actually is helpful for the Mahalach over here, but I'm just going to explain it as Tosfos explains it. We're not going to do any Tosfos inside or anything. But anyways, the flow is as follows. The shaila is, how come this money, the wage, is off limits? So the Gemara suggests, well, maybe because yayn nesech is asur ba'ano. Since yayn nesech is something that's asur ba'ano, so we're particular, we treat it very stringently, and even the wage one receives, kilu, yayn nesech itself is obviously asur ba'ano. And we even say that when it comes to Avodah Zarah, right, Chalifov, when we say Chalifov, Chalifin, whatever, right? Meaning any, what's it called? Demei yayn nesech, demei akvodas kochavim, demei yayn nesech. These things are also osur. Now, the question is, what about the wage? Right? A wage is like one step removed, right? It's not like you're getting benefit directly from the yayn nesech. It's not like you're selling yayn nesech and then that money that you received for having sold yayn nesech. No, it's you were hired to do a job, and then that money that came as a result, kind of one step removed from yayn nesech, we're saying is osur. The question is why? So we want to suggest, well, maybe because since yayn nesech is something that is osur ba'ano, we treat it stringently. The thing is, I can give you examples of other things that are osur ba'ano. Orla is asur ba'ano, right? Fruits of a fruit tree for the first 3 years, asur ba'ano. Kilei aker, right? If you plant like grape seeds and wheat seeds together, you have kilaim, a mixture in the vineyard. These are things that are asur ba'ano. And yet, we don't make a gzera even if you sell them directly, right? Meaning, as the Gemara just said, right? If you take orla or kilei akerim and you sell them for money, you can be mekadesh a woman. If you're mekadesh a woman with that money, mikudeshes, she's married. So we see that by orla and kilei akerim, they're asur ba'ano, and the money that you receive for them, from them, you can be mekadesh a woman with that money. So we don't say that, well, since orla and kilei akerim are asur ba'ano, the money that you receive for them is also asur. We don't say that, and therefore we, when it comes to the money for yayn nesech, which is in this case even one step removed, we're talking about being paid for having worked with yayn nesech, not even direct payment for having sold yayn nesech, but payment for work that you did with yayn nesech. The fact that yayn nesech is asur ba'ano doesn't seem to be important enough, because after all, it wasn't important enough to make the money that you received from selling orla and kilei akerim, right? You could still be mekadesh woman with that, right? The demei orla and the demei kilei akerim is not asur, and that wouldn't therefore be, to say that since yayn nesech is asur ba'ano, therefore the schar for having worked with yayn nesech is asur ba'ano, that wouldn't hold up. Again, my time is schar also. Why is the schar? Why is the wage that one received for having worked with the nesech? Why is that also? If you're going to say, I'm reading this again, right? If we're going to say, well, since the nesech is asur ba'ano, so therefore any wages that you receive for having worked with the nesech is also going to be asur ba'ano. But that doesn't really hold up, because I can give you examples of other things that are also bano. Hare orla, v'kilei hakerim. The asurim bano, that they're also bano, vitnan, and yet we learn in the Mishnah, machron, that if you sell orla or kilei hakerim, which are also bano, the kidesh b'dman, and you took the money from having sold orla v'kilei hakerim, and you're makadesh a woman with that money, mikudeshes. She's mikudeshes. And we don't say, well, but they're also bano. We don't say that. So therefore, that doesn't seem like it would be a reason to say that the wages from working with the nesech are off limits. Elohoil v'toifes as domov kavadas kuchom. Well, maybe the reason is the following. It's not because it's also bano, as we proved from orla v'kilei hakerim, but as I pointed out, I think a few minutes ago, when it comes to Avodah Zarah and also yayn nesech, anything that comes in exchange for, so if you have like an idol and if you sell it, or definitely if you exchange the idol, right? What was it? It came up on Daf Nundalid Amid Beis. What did we say? Right, Chalifin. Right, Chalifin. Echlifan b'avodas kachom. Shoyzel avodas kachom be'echlifa lo v'kachom b'behemto, for example. Okay. But now what are we saying? Okay. But Tofes is dumb, its values. I think you can even say, right, when it doesn't sound like we're talking about Chalifin over here. So if you have Avodah Zarah and you sell, I think that's correct. What does Rashi say? Okay. Yeah, dumb, fine. I think it's probably accurate to say that if you sell Avodah Zarah, that money is osur, and if you sell yayn nesech, that money is osur. So therefore, we want to say, okay, forget, it's not because yayn nesech is osur bano, but it's because there's a stringency by yayn nesech as well as by avodah zarah that if you sell it, the money that you receive for it is osur bano. Right, so that wasn't the case by orla and kilei hakerim necessarily. Right, that wasn't the case by orla and kilei hakerim. We said if you're makadesh woman, she's mekudeshes. But when it comes to avodah zarah, and when it comes to yayn nesech, it's one step more deeper. It's one step more stringent. That if you sell avodah zarah, if you sell yayn nesech, so the money that you receive is also bano. So because yayn nesech and Avodah Zarah are so stringent that even any money that you receive for them is asur. So therefore, we're also going to take it one step further and say that any wages that you receive for having worked with yayn nesech, in this case, is also going to be forbidden. The thing is that also doesn't hold up. Who could tell me why that doesn't hold up? Shemitah. Also on Daf Nundalid Amud Beis, we learned, right, we said that Avodah Zarah and Shemitah and Shvius are Shnei Ksuvan Abayin Kechad, right? We said that by Shemitah as well. Any money that you receive for Shemitah, Tofes is Domel, right? If you sell Shemitah, right, if I'm a fruit monger and I have Shemitah fruits and I sell those fruits, so the money I receive is going to have Kedusha Shvius. And yet, right, so even though by Kedushas Shvius, also, it's Tofes as Domel. And yet, as we're going to see, if one does work with, right, is hired to, pick some vegetables of Shemitah or whatever, and he gets paid for his work, those wages are mutter. Those wages are mutter when it comes to Shemitah. So therefore, to say that the reason why the Mishnah is saying that any wages that you receive for having done work with yayn nesech are osur, because since yayn nesech is tofes es domel, right, it's so stringent that if you sell yayn nesech, then the money you receive for it is osur. So therefore, we also say that also wages that you receive for having worked with yayn nesech are also osur. But that doesn't hold up, because Shemitah also, if you sell it, the money you receive for it is as kedusha shvius, and yet, if you're hired to do work during Shemitah, the wages are permitted. So says the Gemara, where am I? So Ella Horel v'Tofes is Domov Kavadis Kuchovin. So we want to suggest 4 lines before it gets wide, or 5 lines before it gets wide, we want to suggest, well, the reason why the wages for having done work with yayn nesech are usher is because yayn nesech is very stringent. Just like Avodah Zarah, that when you sell yayn nesech or Avodah Zarah, the money that you receive is also usher. And therefore, we take it one step deeper and say that also any wages that you receive for having worked with yayn nesech is also going to be usher. But varei shvius, that argument doesn't hold up, because when it comes to Shemitah, the Tofesa says that if you have Perish Shvius and you sell Perish Shvius, the money that you receive for the Perish Shvius have Kedushas Shvius, Vitanan, and yet we learned in a Mishnah, Ha'omer lefoil, that if a person says to a worker, Heilach dinar zeh, so if he says here, take this dinar, I'm paying you a dinar, likot li yerek hayom schar aser. So if the arrangement was that the balabayis, right, the owner of the field, says to his worker, take this dinar and now pick for me, gather for me vegetables today, well, that won't be okay, because basically it's like he's set, right? If he's being clear, the balabais is saying, take this dinar, and basically I'm paying you a dinar, now do some, get me some vegetables. It's ki'ilu, basically we treat it as if the worker is collecting a dinar's worth of vegetables and then selling those vegetables to the balabais, in which case that's basically, it's going to be demei shvius, and that is going to be also. However, if what he says is lekot li yerek hayom, but if he's hired to pick vegetables that day, so not necessarily for a dinar's worth of vegetables, but to receive a dinar as a wage for doing work that day, scharo mutter, so in that case, the wage, the dinar, is permitted. So, what do we see? So we see that by Shemitah, even though Shemitah is tofes as damav, as we saw, for example, when he says, here's a dinar, collect for me vegetables, we said that that's not okay, because it's like he's selling the Shemitah produce to the Baal Habayis, in which case that would be not okay, because at least it would have Kedushas Shvius. And you can't do business with Kedushas Shvius, so that would not be okay. But if he says, I'm hiring you to do work with Kedushas, with Shemitah, the wage is permitted, and therefore I would extend that to yayn nesech and say that if you sell yayn nesech, any money that you receive for the sale would be also, but to be hired to work with yayn nesech should be okay. Amar Rababo, says Rababo, Amar Yechanan, knas hu shekonsu chachamim bechamorin uviyayn nesech. Says Rababo that look. Yeah, we're trying to rationalize, we're trying to come up with a reason why the wages for yayn nesech should be usher. You're not going to find a reason, right? We tried to say, well, because usher ba'ano, yeah, but orlin kilei hakerem are usher ba'ano. We say, well, because it's tov zamed, yeah, but Shemitah is tov zamed. So rather, it's a chumrah. That's it. It's a knas. Knas u'shekansu chacham. The chacham made a knas, a fine, to say, we don't want you working with yayn nesech. They're machmir when it comes to yayn nesech, and they say, and if you work with yayn nesech, the wages are going to be usher. They make this knas by yayn nesech, and they make this knas by donkey drivers. Yayn nesech had amaron, chamaron mai. Okay, so the yayn nesech, as we're talking about, as we learned in our Mishnah, that if you do work with the yayn nesech, any wages you receive are usher. Fine. What's the scenario with the donkey drivers? Where's the knas by the donkey drivers? It's in the following case. The sanya that we learn in a brayso, chamarin, donkey drivers, shahayu osin melacha beperish shvius, that they were doing melacha with perish shvius. Scharon shvius, their wages that they receive for doing work with perish shvius, maybe transporting perish shvius someplace, or maybe working the field or something. Their wages that they received are themselves kedushas shvius. And it means, what does Rashi say? What does Rashi say? Oh, he doesn't say anything. But I think the point is that it would be Kedusha Shvis. Then there's the whole shot of the Zman HaBiur. I didn't realize how big of a machloka Zman HaBiur is. I never really understood so much Zman HaBiur either. Who can tell me what Zman HaBiur is? It's actually a huge machlokas, actually. Does anybody know what Zman HaBiur is? It's going to come up today, tomorrow. How does Shemitah work? I don't know. It seems super complicated. But basically, when you have produce on Shemitah, okay, so like, I'm going to use pomegranates. The Rambam talks about pomegranates, so I use pomegranates. So pomegranates during Shemitah, okay? So any pomegranates that grow during Shemitah, you're allowed to eat it. Why not? I mean, it's Kedusha Shvius. You have to be careful. Don't throw it out there. It's holy. You have to treat it properly, but you can eat it, right? But there's something called the Zman HaBiur, which is kind of like this weird concept. It always seems like a little bit elusive, but anyways, what Zman HaBiur is that so long as pomegranates are still available in the fields and the orchards, and anybody who wants can take pomegranates. Usually it's in the context of the animals, right? As long as there's right for the animals in the field. I don't know if animals eat pomegranates, but so long as there are still pomegranates available, so any of your own pomegranates that you have in your house, that it's all good. Once there are no longer any pomegranates, any Shemitah pomegranates to be found, so then it's what's called the Zman HaBiur. And it's actually a big machlokus about what happens. See, I always thought that what happens is now you have to make them hefker. You can't hoard them anymore. You can't have so long as there's pomegranates available publicly for everybody, so you can have your own stash of pomegranates. Now, once it comes to the Zman HaBiur, so then, if there's no longer pomegranates available, you have to get rid of your own pomegranates. You can't have your own stash of pomegranates anymore. So one explanation of what happens is that you just have to make them hefker. You have to take your pomegranates, bring them outside, and say whoever wants them, take them. Now, you yourself can take them back from hefker, just like anybody else can. Apparently that's the opinion of Rashi and some others. The Rambam was like mind-blowing. The Rambam says that what happens is that the Zman HaBiur, you destroy them. It's a little mind-blowing. You have like Shemitah fruit, as it is, there isn't like much fruit to go around. We're saying as long as there's fruit available, so like you could still have them in your house, once there's no longer fruit available in the fields, you have to destroy the pomegranates. That was like mind-blowing. I think that's what he says. Yeah, I mean, I read the Rambam. That seems to be what he's saying. I also I read the introduction to Masechta Shvius in the Kahati Mishnais. He explains it the same way, which is mind-blowing. The Ravid there on the Rambam then argues, he is a little bit of a different perspective. So it's like a big machlokas about what exactly this Zman HaBiur is. Now, Cheva, why am I getting into this? Because it's going to be relevant today and tomorrow. But the reason why I'm getting into it is because I think the point that we're making is that any wages that this donkey driver receives, the wages of Kedusha Shvius, which means that once it reaches the Zman HaBiur, I think in this way, actually, probably the easiest way to understand it would probably be the Rambam, let's just talk about the Rambam for a second, right? So when Zman HaBiur comes, so let's say he was doing work, this donkey driver was doing work with pomegranates, and he received money for the wages that he did that was working with pomegranates, and we're saying that we're going to treat those wages as Shemitah. Well, then when there's no longer any pomegranates around and people have to get rid of their pomegranates, you have to get rid of your money. You have to take those money and throw it into the Dead Sea, or I don't know, maybe make it hefker or something like that. Anyways, okay. So therefore, that was all to say, that like, yeah, I felt like it was a lot to learn about Zmana. I feel like I was lacking a lot of knowledge there, probably still lacking a lot of knowledge, but also, anyways, this is what this concept is, I believe. So therefore, schar and shvius, any wages that this donkey driver receives for having provided his donkey services with the Shemitah, so the wages are themselves Shemitah, and I think the point is that then comes the Zman HaBiur, he would have to get rid of them. My schar and shvius. So now what does it mean that his wages are shvius? If we're going to say, well, what does it mean that the donkey driver's wages are shvius? Maybe it means that, well, instead of getting paid in dollars, he gets paid in pomegranates of Shemitah. But Where am I? Nimtza ze poreach. Where am I? Lose schar miper shvius. But that can't be because nimtza ze poreach chovo miper shvius. But that can't be because then the balabayas is basically paying the donkey driver with Shemitah produce, with Shemitah pomegranates in my example, but Shemitah produce, but the Torah says, that Shemitah fruits, perishvius, are to eat. You eat the pomegranates, that's what you do with them. You don't do business with them, you don't pay people with them. Ve'ela de kodesh scharon b'kedushas shvius. So rather, maybe what it means is that the wage, so he's paid in money, he's paid in dollars or shekels or whatever it is. He's paid in money, and that money has kedushas shvius. And again, I assume what that means is that, comes the zman abir, he's got to get rid of it. No, mi kadosh, but is that really the case? What is wages really have kedushas shvius? So I'm actually going to jump back up to 4 lines before it gets wide and use that version, because that's, I think, the correct version of the next 2 lines, which is via Tanam. We learn in a Mishnah, Armor the foil. I'm 4 lines before it gets wide. However, the foil that if somebody says to a worker, we read this earlier, hey lach dinar, take this dinar zeh, likotli bo yerek ayom, and now gather for me, harvest for me some vegetables. Schar also, we said the schar is also because he's basically buying. He's doing business directly with the perishvius. He's basically saying, get me a dinar's worth of vegetables, and I'll pay you a dinar for them. But the kotli yerek ayom, if he says, I want to hire you for the day, and I'll pay you a dinar for your labor, schar mutter. So the schar is mutter. So why are we saying by the donkey driver that if he gets paid for his shemitah work, why would we say that it's kadosh b'kedushas, right? That the scharon is kedushas shvius? We just said that if a person is hired for his labor, so then it's mutter, it's permitted. So Amar Abai, 3 lines from the bottom of the Amid. Amar Abai says, Abai le'olam yavinan le sacher miper shvius. So Abai says like the first one, right? We had 2 options for what it means with this donkey driver. Either he's being paid with paris of kedusha shvius, but we said, but it's la'ocher v'lo l'schor. Alternatively, we said that he's being paid with money, and that money is kedusha shvius, but we said that, but we had just said that you're allowed to be hired. So Amar Abai, so Abai says it's the former, it's the fruits. The olam yavinon le sacher mi peris shvius, that he's being paid with, let's say, pomegranates of shemitah. V'dekah kashalach la'ocher v'lo l'schora. And you're going to say, yeah, but what about the drasha? The pasuk says, right? Is that what the pasuk says? Oh no, that is the pasuk. To eat it and not to do business with. So how could he be getting paid with fruits of shemitah? He gives it to him in a permitted way. He gives it to him in a permitted way, essentially as like a gift. What does Rashi say? Okay, he gives the fruits to the donkey driver in a way that they would be considered a gift rather than wages. Okay, it's not as willing to the Mishnah by Meiser Sheni Loyomar Adam Lachaveru. A person shouldn't say to his friend, Haleli Peiris Halol Yerushalayim Lechelek. I'm imagining that, I don't know, maybe a guy is going up to Yerushalayim and he's got a lot of Meiser Sheni fruits maybe that he's bringing to Yerushalayim, and he asks his friend, hey, can you come and schlep fruit, Meiser Sheni, and then when we go there we'll split it. So we said don't do that, right? Lo Yomar Adam Lachaveru Haleli Peiris Halol Yerushalayim Lechelek. Don't. Person shouldn't say to his friend, can you bring this Peiris Meiser Sheni to me and we'll split it, because then he's basically paying with Meiser Sheni, so that's not okay. Avo, however, Omelo, what he can suggest, Ha'aleim le'ochlam v'lishtosu b'shlayim v'nosin zelozim matona shel chinam. But he can say, bring them up and we'll eat them and we'll drink them and he's giving to them as long as he gives it as a gift rather than as a wage, right? So I guess in the first place he was saying lechelek in the first example, like, and we'll split it. Then it's as if he's like paying him out. But if he says, can you bring the Ma'aser Sheni to Yerushalayim and we'll enjoy it and we'll enjoy it together, and and like this, I guess he would be. I guess as long as he's kind of phrasing it as a gift, it would be okay. So here as well. So says Abaye. So what was this? So what was this talking about with the kedusha shvius, that his wages are kedusha shvius? So Abaye says, well, what's happening is by the donkey driver, he's actually being paid with fruits of Shemitah. How can he be paid with fruits of Shemitah? Well, because he's receiving it as a gift, but it's still going to be Shemitah fruits, and it's going to be kedushas shvius. V'Ravi Omar, whereas Rava says, no, it's the wages. No, he's being paid with money. But then why is that money kedushas shvius? I thought we said that you can be hired to do work with Shemitah, or at least if you're hired to do work with Shemitah, the wages are mutter. So why are we saying that it's kedushas shvius? It is talking about the wages. He's being paid with money. But that money is kedushas shvius. And if you're going to ask, Poyo, what about the fact that we had said earlier from the Mishnah that a worker who is paid, who receives wages to work with kedusha, with Shemitah, the wages are mutter. Poyol deloy nofish agre lo konsu rabbonon. Chamorin di nofish agre konsu rabbonon behu. Says Rava, if you're asking me what about the Mishnah that says that a worker who works with Shemitah and he receives a wage, that wage is permitted, because workers make a lot less money than donkey drivers. And because workers, and as the Rambam actually says, Kidei Chayav, he needs it to live on. So when it comes to a worker who's not making as much money, so we say, okay, the wage is fine, you can have it. But by a donkey driver who's making a lot more money, we are, as Rabbi Bo had said, right? Knasu shekansu chacham b'chamorin u'v'yei nesech. That it's a knas, it's a fine, that the Chacham said that by the donkey workers, by the donkey drivers who are making a lot of money off of kedusha shvius, we say there that the wages themselves have kedushas shvius. Again, poyol deloy nafish agre, a worker who is not making much money, lo konsu rabbanon, the rabbis did not fine him, and they said the wages are mutter. Chamorin do nofish agrayu, but donkey drivers who are making a lot of money off of the work that they're doing with Shemitah, konsu rabbanon behu, the rabbis find them and say that the wages that they receive are going to have kedusha shvius, and that's what Rabbi Bo was talking about when he said that they find the donkey drivers. What about yayn nesech? We said in our Mishnah that just regular old workers, their wages when it comes to yayn nesech are aser. And our Mishnah, which says even just for a poyol, for a regular worker, his wage is forbidden when it comes to yayn nesech, is because yayn nesech is more stringent. We're particularly stringent when it comes to yayn nesech. It still is like not super duper clear so far. I mean, we still have another 2 weeks of Avodah Zarah. Maybe it will become clear, but there's just like when it comes to yayn nesech, we're just like super machmir. It's not like super clear why, honestly. When it comes to stam yaynum is more of like the intermarriage thing, and that's just kind of like, I don't know, in some ways similar to like pasakum and stuff like that. Yayn nesech is like this whole machmir kind of situation. We've been talking about it for like the last week or whatever, with all sorts of chumras. Now we're saying we're dafka machmir when it comes to yayn nesech. I mean, Tosfos talks about it a few times. How like nowadays, like people aren't really doing so much like Avodah Zarah with yayn nesech and stuff so much, and still we're just super machmir when it comes to yayn nesech. But I guess this is talking about a situation where it's like literally yayn nesech though. So I guess this is like actually like Avodah Zarah. So I guess in this is like actually yayn nesech. So I guess I can understand why we're being stringent here. So now we move on to the second section of today's daf and the final section of today's daf, working with stam yaynum. We just learned about yayn nesech. We said that the wages are forbidden. What about stam yaynum? Just stam, the wine of Ovekochav. We don't. Whereas in the Mishnah, we were talking about mamash yayn nesech, as Rashi pointed out, like literally wine that was libated for Avodah Zarah. However, now we're talking about stam yaynum. Stam, the wine of chum that we don't know that it was used for Avodah Zarah. What about if you do work with stam yaynum? What's the deal with the wages? What happens if he was hired to work with stam yaynum? Mia minon kevan di surei chomer kedin yayn nesech schar nami also dilma. Well, but to also kill schar nami kill. Look at them what this is talking about. Daf Lamed on the base, Chaver. Daf Lamed on the base. That was a long time ago already. A month ago already, Daf Lamed. I was still in America, I think, for that. I think that was probably my last day I was in America. What does it say on Daf Lamed on the base? I'm about to Rabbi all the way at the bottom of the Lamed on the base. Mishim Rabbi ben Beser Shlosha yayn is saying yayn nesech osur bano u'tamid tuma chamur because I stam yaynum osur bano u'tamid tumas mashkin beravius. That the Mishnah on that Lamed Amud Beis says that both by, not the Mishnah, the Gemara on that Lamed Amud Beis says that both by yayn nesech and stam yaynum, they're both osur bano. They're both osur bano. However, we also say that both yayn nesech and stam yaynum are also, they have tumah. We said they have tumah associated with them. And the level of tumah with yayn nesech is higher than that by stam yaynum. By yayn nesech, the tumah is metame, like be'oil and b'masa, b'masa u'v'ohel, which is interesting. And that's not the case by yayn nesech. That's not the case by stam yaynum, where it'll be metame ochel and v'mashkin. I guess it's probably like a rishon kind of status. So therefore, coming back to Daf Samach Beis Amud Beis, so the question of, if you do work with stam yaynum, are the wages permitted or forbidden? So the question is, well, how do we want to frame it? If we view it from the perspective of Isser Hano'ah, well, we'll say that, well, both yayn nesech and stam yaynum are osur bano. So therefore, let's have the same stringency and say that the wages are forbidden. But if we look from the perspective of their levels of tumah, yayn nesech is a higher level of tumah than stam yaynum, so maybe it's also more stringent when it comes to the wages for working with yayn nesech. Maybe the wages from working with stam yaynum should be okay. What's your gut? What's your gut here? What do you think? What's your gut here? So again, if a fellow was hired, a yid was hired to work with stam yaynum of an ovik chacham, what's the halacha? Well, on the one hand, we could say, well, since the isser, i.e. asur bano, since the isser is stringent by stam yaynum, just like by yayn nesech, that both are asur bano, so scharo nami asur. So therefore, the wages that one receives for working with stam yaynum should also be asur. Or Dilmar, perhaps, to also kill, since the level of tumah by stam yaynum is a lower level of tumah than by yayn nesech. So we should be more lenient when it comes to the yayn nesech. No, we should be, sorry, for some reason I thought that maybe there was like the Houthis were shooting a missile at us or something, but I don't think that they are. I don't hear it. Anyways, sorry, so do we say that since the level of tumah by stam yaynum is a lower level of tumah, so therefore we could be more lenient by stam yaynum and say that the wages are permitted? Fine. Tashma coming here. There was a certain yid, the augur arve l'stam yaynum, that he had a boat. And he rented out his boat, right? We learned about the donkey driver in the Mishnah. So a fellow had a boat, and he rented out his boat to an ovik chachavim to transport stam yaynum. And they gave him wheat for his payment. Also the comment of Chisda, so this yid comes to Rav Chisda, and Rav Chisda says, Zil kalinu v'kavrinu be kavri. And you know what Rav Chisda said? Osir. Take the wheat, burn them, and bury them in the graveyard. The wages for stam yaynum are osir. And now the Gemara says, badrinu, why does he have to burn them and bury the ashes in a graveyard? Why Why not just scatter the wheat? Why isn't that enough? Also, well, people might end up taking that wheat, and it's also that wheat. V'leklinu, v'livdarinu. Okay, but still, why do you have to burn them and bury them? Why not just burn them and scatter them? Well, because maybe the people will use it as fertilizer. If you burn the wheat and then scatter the ashes, it could be used as fertilizer. Chevra, does this ring a bell? Fertilizer? Of course it does. Chevra, what bells does this ring? Machlekes between the Chacham and Rabbi Yossi about how to dispose of Avodah Zarah. If you make it into, you burn it, make it into ashes, and then scatter, or the dust. What was it? It was Daf Nunvav Amid Beis. No, not the. Where am I? Yeah, where was that? Where was the Gemara that we had about? Oh, sheesh, I can't remember. But what was it? Oh, here it is. Shochik v'zar l'ruach. I'm gimel Amid Beis. There's a machlokes in Rabbi Yossi and the Chachamim, Abaye Avodah Zarah, disposing of Avodah Zarah, to grind it up into powder and to throw it into the air. And it was a halacha of Zev Zagor, it was a whole machlokes of Zev Zagor, and then we paskin like Rabbi Yossi that you're allowed to scatter it. So what do you say? What do you say? Right, we're saying you burn it and bury it. Why not just burn it and scatter it? Well, it could be used as fertilizer. So what? We paskin like Rabbi Yossi anyways, as the Gemara says. What's the problem? Okay, Tosfos says that anyways, it's good to be machmer for the Chacham anyways. Okay, fine. Anyways, where are we? So people might fertilize with it. V'lik barinu be'einayu. Okay, fine. So we have to bury it. So why do you have to burn it and bury it? So just bury it all. Who cares? Bury it. Milo Tanya. After all, don't we learn in a brisa in Sanhedrin? Echad evin sheniskolba. A person who is stoned. So the stone that he is stoned with, the echad eitz shenisla olav, and then after being stoned, I call a nislin, call a niskol a nislin. Everyone who's stoned is then hanged. So the tree that he was hanged from, ve'echad sayiv shenerugbo, or the sword that he was sliced with, ve'echad sura shenechnach bo, or the cloth that he was strangled with, kulam nikbar mimo, they're buried with him. That's interesting. That the sword that they sliced his head off with it's a one-time, it's a disposable thing. You slice his head off and then you have to bury it with him. So you bury it with the fellow whole. Right? You don't burn it or anything. You just bury it. So over there, why do you bury it whole? And over here we're saying you have to burn the wheat first. So also the kokavre bevedina muchachabilsa daruge bezdinin. Well, yeah, because over there, right? I think we said over there in Sanhedrin, I believe that there's a bezdin has a special cemetery, and he's buried there in that cemetery. So because there's a whole special kind of cemetery around that, people know to just leave that stuff alone. But over here, lo muchachamilsa, it wouldn't be obvious that this is wheat that was received as payment for stam yaynum. Emer inish ganef. People who might dig up this wheat, they'll say, oh, interesting, somebody must have stolen this wheat and buried it, and look, we found it. They won't realize that it was buried because it was stam yaynum wages, so therefore burn it, bury the ashes. Okay, but it sounds like the point being that you may not receive, or that the wages received for working with stam yaynum are osur. Okay, Chevra, I think we're going to stop here for Daf Samech Beis of Masechta Avodah Zarah. Yeah, tomorrow we're going to get into an interesting sugya tomorrow. And yeah, so I think that Daf Samech Beis of Masechta Avodah Zarah was a relatively straightforward daf. We began the 5th parak of Masechta Avodah Zarah. We talked about working with yayn nesech. The wages for working with yayn nesech are osur. We tried to figure out how come that is. Turns out it is a chumrah, and chumrah when it comes to yayn nesech. And then we asked about how does this play out with stam yaynum, and it would seem from the story with this Yid and Rav Chizda and his wheat that he received for payment that would be osur as well. Chevra, that was Daf Samech Beis of Masechta Avodah Zarah. I hope you enjoyed. Cheers.